This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Coronavirus numbers in Africa continue to rise as the continent confirms over 18,000 cases. The Economic Commission for Africa says over 300,000 Africans could lose their lives due to COVID-19. And Wuhan authorities give an update on the correct numbers of confirmed cases and fatalities. We'll bring you those new figures in a moment. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtonganall in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, Nigeria's informal sector workers struggle to put food on the table. And in sports, athletes living with disabilities in South Africa feel the impact of the coronavirus lockdown. Right, let's start the program with some of the latest figures on the COVID-19 pandemic. Worldwide, there are now more than 2 million cases and 145,000 people have died. The US has reported more than 31,000 new cases over the past 24 hours. Total cases there have now topped 671,000. That's about a third of the global total. More than 33,000 people have died in the country. More than half of all confirmed cases are in Europe, with Spain and Italy the hardest hit. In the Middle East, Iran has registered more than 77,000 infections. The Chinese mainland reported 26 new cases on Thursday. 11 were local transmissions, 15 were people returning from abroad. Well, over 18,000 cases of the coronavirus have been reported in Africa. Data from the Africa CDC also shows the continent's death toll is getting closer to the 1,000 mark. The number of recoveries is, however, also rising, with 4,000 reported. Africa has so far recorded a relatively low number of COVID-19 cases. The Africa CDC has, however, noted the continent has a big gap when it comes to testing capabilities. The organization estimates that 15 million testing kits are needed. In response, it has announced plans to roll out 1 million COVID-19 testing kits. The African Union is set to distribute the kits starting next week. Meanwhile, a report by the Economic Commission for Africa is painting a rather grim picture for the continent. The report estimates that COVID-19 could kill over 300,000 Africans. The current death toll stands at 962. Governments across the continent have put in place various measures to curb the spread of the virus. The ECA report also highlighted the need for governments to provide safety nets. Vera Songwe, the UN Under-Secretary General and the ECA's Executive Secretary, stated $100 billion is needed in order to provide that safety net. The report also noted Africa's SMEs could risk complete closure without immediate support. Well, let's bring you more on this report. We're now joined by CGTN's Girum Chala in Addis. Girum, that report coming from the ECA certainly paints a rather gloomy picture for what lies ahead for Africa. Just tell us more about what's detailed and what we can expect in a future scenario.
Lindy, this report released virtually by the Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Africa, Vera Songwe, as you've said, is really painting a rather gloomy picture for the coming weeks and months for the African economy. As you've said, the economies will be slowing down because of the COVID-19 spread. And the report says that about 27 million people could be lured to extreme poverty in this continent. Many people could lose their jobs, and the hardship is going to hit many countries and economies as soon as perhaps next month. So the Economic Commission for Africa says we have to act now, and we have to do it with the international community. That's why it's asking for $100 billion injection to African economies to be done by the international community. Also, she's saying that the private sector is the one that is the engine for African economies to move, especially the lower economic sectors like the small economies that we have in this continent. So that's why she is suggesting, and based on the report, that we need to inject liquidity, and we have to do it from the international community. If we don't do that, many people are going to suffer because of the economic consequence than the deaths that we have already predicted of 300,000 people dying of the COVID-19. So this is really an unfortunate prediction, but it is going to happen if action is not going to be taken.
And Gurum, we've seen that across the continent, African governments have implemented lockdowns and curfews in trying to basically stop us from experiencing a very high outbreak or very high death tolls when it comes to COVID-19. But what other recommendations are mentioned in this ECA report in terms of saving lives and saving economies?
Well, first of all, saving lives is the way forward. The roadmap is going to be taken from the WHO's recommendation for countries to implement as maximum level of protecting their citizens by closing economic sectors and social distancing and hygiene and other things, provision for their communities, as also to do as much testing as possible, contact tracing and other things. And countries are asked to do this jointly. This is not a one man's job or a one country's job. Every nation in the continent must work accordingly so that the results can also benefit every country in this continent, because Africa, many are saying, including WHO, the worst is not here yet, but it will come sooner. So saving lives is a priority, and many countries are working towards that, but many still are also behind schedule. When it comes to the economic sector, the UN ECS report is time and again expressing concerns that African states are not acting swiftly. As you know, for example, because of the oil price going down, because it went very low, 40% of African economies are going to be affected, because 40% of the export of the African economies is based on the oil itself. So this is going to be a huge disaster for many economies, especially the bigger ones. And then they are saying that, look, we have to do an international cooperation scenario so that African states can be saved from the disaster that is going to come up. And as I was saying earlier, liquidity is one way of doing it, but saving small enterprises, small economic sectors that can generate good job opportunities for citizens should be focused on. Without doing all of these things, without the international cooperation, without governments acting as soon as possible, the economic disaster is going to affect many people, and we have to be concerned, and that's what they are telling governments across Africa to act now, Lindy.
Indeed, many lives are in the balance due to the economic pressures of COVID-19. Thank you so much, Girum Chala, joining us there live from Addis Ababa. Now, indeed, across Africa, governments are looking to stem the impact of COVID-19. In Burkina Faso, a Chinese medical mission has arrived in the country ready to help in its fight against the virus. CGTN's Asta Tal has more.
12 Chinese medical experts have landed in Ouagadougou with one goal: to support Burkina Faso in its fight against COVID-19. They have a wide array of specialities, from respiratory and intensive care to hospital infection control, epidemiology, and other fields.
Through our mission here in Burkina Faso, I would like to share our expertise through training and discussions with our Burkinabe counterparts so that they can strengthen their capacity, especially with regard to diagnosis, treatment and laboratory tests. We want them to be better equipped to fight COVID-19.
Truly, today is a great moment. Really honorable and memorial moment for our bilateral relations with the arrival of the Chinese medical mission that came on a special plane delivered by the Chinese government in the fight against the COVID-19 for our brother country, Burkina Faso. This is a Chinese mission, but it is also a call from the director of the World Health Organization, who said that we must focus our efforts so that the African continent can be spared from this virus.
Indeed, a representative from the WHO was on the ground to commend China's efforts.
This mission is most welcome. The government of Burkina Faso has rightly requested the support of the Chinese cooperation to come and assist what is already being done here. Now, the Chinese experience with COVID-19 is universally recognized. WHO has ensured that the team that has come is an appropriate team that can help review all aspects of COVID-19 measures in Burkina Faso. Therefore, we should be grateful for the fact that this mission is taking place at this very moment.
In addition to experts, necessary medical equipment has been donated. This includes ventilators, which are necessary for some severe COVID-19 cases. In addition to ventilators, personal protective equipment and other necessary items have also been donated.
I came here today on behalf of the government to welcome this mission from the Republic of China, which has come to help us because of its experience on COVID-19. So we can only rejoice. This mission is almost complete from a scientific point of view because it's a mission that is going to help us take care of COVID-19 patients. And this case involves laboratory diagnosis, scan, and the overall management of patients.
For almost 60 years, China's medical missions have helped health systems across Africa. Now, as a continent looks to curb the spread of the coronavirus, Chinese medical missions like this one are offering support. Astatal, CGTN.
Meanwhile, the team of Chinese medical experts have also arrived in Ethiopia to assist in the fight against COVID-19. The team has been tasked with supporting national and regional health institutions. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with that report.
This China Air flight arriving in Addis Ababa has brought over 12 Chinese medical experts. The first batch of medical professionals is here to support Ethiopia's battle against the coronavirus, as well as advise the Africa Centers for Disease Control.
This is a very strong delegation, and they will help Ethiopians to enhance its ability, because this pandemic is a very serious threat to the humanity. So only by international cooperation, by strengthening international cooperation, can we defeat the common enemy.
These medical professionals from China have been on the front line of Chinese fight against COVID-19, and they have had the experience of handling many cases, as we've been told. But more important for Ethiopia is now the kind of contribution they have brought with them here that is going to help this country defeat the coronavirus.
This is our team. We have we have ICU doctor, we have nurses, we have a respiratory physician, we have someone from CDC for epidemiology. We also have from emergency department, and I'm ID physician. So we have a variety of the specialties.
Ethiopia has considered China's effort of sending these medical professionals alongside different medical consignments as a strong gesture of solidarity and friendship.
China had faced this difficulty before, and then now they are overcoming it, almost they are defeating it, and then now they are lending their hands for friends. Now Ethiopia is one of its closest friends, and then this is also the epitome of that strong fraternal relationship.
The Chinese medical experts have a lot ahead of them, as number of COVID-19 cases are rising by the day in Ethiopia and across the continent. The team will be operating alongside their Ethiopian counterparts.
Because we have continuously worked for fighting COVID-19 for 3 months, we come here to try to provide some kind of help, to share some of our experiences from the front line. So we will see what we can do here depending on the local situations.
China has already said it will send similar medical missions to the rest of the African continent soon.
Welcome to Ethiopia.
Grumchala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Mauritius has received several tons of medical supplies from the Chinese government that will enable it to combat the spread of the coronavirus. They include face masks, personal protective equipment, testing kits and thermometers. The Chinese cities of Guangzhou, Changzhou, Foshan and Meizhou have also sent messages of support to Mauritians. The latest support will bolster the country's capacity after the arrival of Jack Ma's second batch of donations on Wednesday. Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei has also partnered with local hospitals in providing communication equipment. The video conferencing technology is easing communication between local doctors and Chinese experts. Well, celebrations marked the discharge of 4 more COVID-19 patients at Uganda's Mulago Hospital. This brings the total number of recovered patients to 12. Nurses and doctors broke into song and dance as the patients left the facility. However, the identities of the patients have so far not been revealed for fear of stigmatization. Uganda's COVID-19 cases now stand at 55. Health workers say all patients are in a stable condition. 6 more could be leaving the hospital soon.
Our patients were being monitored at least 3 times a day, checking their vitals, including the temperature, blood pressure, blood sugar, and we took off blood samples for various tests, which helped us to manage them as our patients. And in addition, they had a chest X-ray, all of them. And according to the results, apart from the supportive treatment, which included high doses of vitamin C, we gave them specific treatment according to any other comorbidities or any other illnesses they had.
The number of the monitors we have in the hospital are not enough if we had, for example, 1,000 patients. So we call upon the Ministry of Health and the government at large that Mulago Hospital and other hospitals in this country, the time is now to prepare so that should we have bigger numbers in the future, we should be able to manage them. I would also say that in Mulago Hospital, we need like another extra 700 ventilators, 700 monitors, and our oxygen plant is good, but the pressure cannot fill the entire hospital.
You are watching Africa Live. Time now for a short break. Still ahead on the program, Wuhan authorities give an update on the correct numbers of confirmed cases and fatalities. We'll bring you those figures in a moment. And the UN boss warns of the hidden impact of the coronavirus pandemic on children. China's Wuhan city has corrected its number of confirmed coronavirus cases and its death toll. Authorities say 325 cases have been added, which now brings the overall number of infections to 50,333. There are an additional 1,290 deaths. That puts the total deaths in the city at 3,869. The numbers are calculated as of April 16th. Now, as Wuhan corrected its number of confirmed cases and its death toll, the adjusted figures have raised concerns. But experts say government officials were not hiding any information. CGTN reporter Wu Guxiao spoke to an epidemiologist in China who explained what the new figures mean.
Dr. Ning, somebody have been questioning whether China's COVID-19 figures were true, and now there are revised figures. Does this mean that the government was hiding the truth?
The diagnosis of the disease. At the beginning, there is no available test to confirm the diagnosis. And later on, even we develop the PCR technology. Still, in some hospitals, there is a large shortage of professionals and equipment and assay to have such diagnosis. Even there are some tests, the sensitivity of the diagnosis is relatively lower.
Why does the government change figures now? How do you understand this move?
I'm thinking right now the epidemic in Wuhan was relatively well controlled. It's good timing to review the data, and also if there was some difference and revise the data, like incidence, mortality ratio, and mortality rate, like the key factors reflecting the epidemic. And also, when we get the truth, the facts of the epidemic, is better to report to public as soon as possible. It's good timing.
Are there any other examples of doing so in other countries during this pandemic or in some other pandemics?
Let's back to the general infection disease. Some infection disease, even some non-communicable disease, the under-report or delayed report is very common. It's very common in other countries too. Even for many other diseases like hepatitis B and pertussis and like measles, a very common disease. But this time maybe the revision, the difference a little bit larger. However, it's understandable at a special time. It's a novel virus disease.
Then, Dr. Ning, how do you see the new revised figures with 300 more infections and 1/3 more of fatalities?
This also can see how we support to Wuhan. Even early stage, there is a large shortage of health professionals. 42,000 health professionals went to Wuhan, and the best treatment equipment was transported to Wuhan for patients' treatment. The effects of the treatment are improved very much. So right now, if we compare the fatality ratio with other epicenters in other countries, still the fatality ratio is relatively low. This shows our fully support and the professional support to one city from the whole country.
Well, the new data from Wuhan now raises China's total coronavirus death toll to 4,632. That's up from 3,342. China's foreign ministry says verification of statistics was a common international practice and was carried out to ensure accuracy.
Behind the epidemic statistics are the lives and health of people. It also embodies the credibility of the government. The epicenter of the outbreak, Wuhan City, in accordance with the principle of being responsible for history, people, and deceased, promptly revised the death tolls of confirmed cases. This helps safeguard the interests of the people and also helps epidemic prevention and control.
Turning to the United States now, President Donald Trump has proposed guidelines for state governors to act on to revive the U.S. economy. CGTN's Nathan King reports.
After weeks of saying he'd like to get the U.S. economy open once again and quickly, this plan is very different. There's no one day where the economy suddenly gets an on switch. There are 3 phases to reopening. These are the guidelines, of course, from the White House, and none of these phases can start, says the White House, until there is a 2-week reduction in the number of COVID or COVID-like cases, that hospitals can cope with all patients, including COVID and non-COVID patients, and that there is testing, including antibody testing, for frontline healthcare workers as well. And even in phase 1, schools remain closed.
teleworking is encouraged, social distancing, people wearing masks, only a certain number of people envisaged going back to work, vulnerable populations still at home, sports arenas closed. Only in phase 2 do you start to see a lifting of that. And the question is, when does that happen? Well, the president says it's all up to America.
Our team of experts now agrees that we can begin the next front in our war, which we are calling opening up America again. And that's what we're doing. We're opening up our country. And we have to do that. America wants to be open, and Americans want to be open.
Interestingly, there is no timeline put on these guidelines. Essentially, days after saying that I call the shots, the president is now saying to the 50 state governors, you call the shots. It's up to you how quickly you implement this. The healthcare advisors and the coronavirus task team are basically saying it's up to the governors, and of course the health of the American workforce is paramount.
We did not put a timeline on any of the phases. We want the governors, with the data that they have, community by community, to be setting up those timelines.
The predominant and completely driving element that we put into this was the safety and the health of the American public. And I know there are a lot of other considerations that go into opening, considerations that you've heard of right from this podium. But the dominating drive of this was to make sure that this is done in the safest way possible.
There are still many unanswered questions, especially will the federal government support the states when it comes to things they need, including test kits, which have been patchy at best throughout this country. And then what happens after phase 3? It is still a very new normal, and it's likely to continue that way well into 2021 until a vaccine is found. Nathan King, CGTN at the White House.
Meanwhile, the United Nations Secretary General is warning of the impact the ongoing coronavirus pandemic will have on children. Antonio Guterres says even if children are not largely affected by the disease itself, they need to be cushioned against socioeconomic effects that may be long-term. Here's Wilkista Nyaba with more.
As the world unites in battling the COVID-19 pandemic, the United Nations boss is making a passionate appeal: protection of children. According to Antonio Guterres, socio-economic effects on children will last longer than the disease. Those especially in poor economies might be worst hit. Speaking at the UN headquarters in New York during the launch of a report on the impact of COVID-19 on children, Guterres called on leaders and families all over the world to ensure that children are well protected.
Thankfully, children have so far been largely spared from the most severe symptoms of the disease, but their lives are being totally upended. I appeal to families everywhere and leaders at all levels: protect our children.
With many countries in lockdowns as governments battle the disease, UN is expressing fears of the young ones being exposed to domestic violence.
With children out of school, their communities in lockdown and the global recession biting deeper, family stress levels are rising. Children are both victims and witnesses of domestic violence and abuse. With schools closed, an important early warning mechanism is missing. There is also a danger that girls will drop out of school, leading to an increase in teenage pregnancies. And we must not ignore the growing risks children are facing as they spend more time online.
Nutrition is also another issue. Many families that live from hand to mouth have been forced to scale down on domestic budgets, leaving children at a risk of malnutrition. Vaccination programs have also been scaled down as governments focus on battling COVID-19. Expectant and lactating mothers are also not safe.
Reduced household income will force poor families to cut back on essential health and food expenditures, particularly affecting children, pregnant women, and breastfeeding mothers. Polio vaccination campaigns have been suspended. Measles immunization campaigns have stopped in at least 23 countries. And as health services become overwhelmed, sick children are less able to access care. With the global recession gathering pace, there could be hundreds of thousands additional child deaths in 2020. These are just some of the findings of the report we are issuing today. And its conclusion is clear. We must act now on each of these threats to our children. Leaders must do everything in their power to cushion the impact of the pandemic. What started as a public health emergency has snowballed into a formidable test for the global promise to leave no one behind.
The coronavirus pandemic has affected over 2 million people globally, with over 140,000 deaths recorded. With no cure in sight, the true effect of the disease will be known and felt for years to come as a global economy shrinks in its wake. Wilkisanyabo, CGTN.
Here's what's coming up in your business news up next. Nigeria's informal sector workers struggle to put food on the table. And the IMF seeks $18 billion in new resources to support poor countries.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Business news now. Across most sub-Saharan economies, the informal sector accounts for 85% of employment. As more and more countries impose restrictions designed to fight COVID-19, hundreds of millions of people are compelled to stay home or work for drastically less hours with no savings as a buffer. In Lagos, Nigeria, the country's commercial capital, 3 out of every 7 of its 20 million residents can't always get enough food under normal circumstances. The 14-day lockdown there was extended by another 2 weeks on Monday, and it has thrown millions more into need. Food prices spiked as residents raced to stock up, but not everyone can afford the basics. CGTN's Alexandria Majala takes up the story.
Shehu Issa Dayanu has run out of cash and only has a few handfuls of cassava flour left to eat. The 53-year-old paraplegic usually sells phone cards, but an extended lockdown to fight coronavirus in Nigeria's biggest city, Lagos, has left him stranded.
If this coronavirus did not kill people with disability, definitely this hunger of stay at home will kill people. Because let me tell you, most of my people, they don't eat.
Dayanu says that the Lagos state government sent him a text after the lockdown began on March 30th, saying he would receive a food parcel. But no food came, and with government offices closed, he has no idea when or how he will get any. Those who have received the aid say it's not enough.
They should bring more food now. Even if we see more food, we will still collect. Because people are still inside. Because this food they bring is not enough for everybody. They cannot go round. It's not enough.
Hunger and anger are building in Lagos and other major African cities with little or no social safety net to protect the poor from the economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic.
If this continues, we're afraid that some people might starve. Some people might starve, and that is already happening.
The World Food Programme says at least 20% of Africa's 1.2 billion people are already undernourished, the highest percentage in the world. The combination of widespread poverty, reliance on imported food and price spikes due to the epidemic could prove deadly if African governments don't act quickly. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
The IMF's managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, says the fund is seeking to triple its concessional funding pool for the world's poorest countries. In a statement made at a meeting of G20 leaders, she said the fund was urgently seeking some $18 billion in new resources for the fund's Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust.
Make sure that we can do more for those that need us the most. And that means aiming to triple concessional financing, which is so necessary for our poor members. What we have seen is central banks providing ample liquidity, $8 trillion of fiscal measures. So our message is spend as much as you can, but keep the receipts. We don't want accountability and transparency to take a backseat in this crisis. We are telling everybody, do all you can. And I just want to assure you that we are following ourselves on our own advice. Everything is on the table in terms of measures we can take.
Well, Egypt has been paying out relief grants this week. Millions of workers have been struggling to make their daily wages amid the coronavirus lockdown, but distributing the grants has tested the infrastructure of the public banking system. Here's CGTN's Adel El-Mahroui with more.
In just 4 days, 2 public financial entities distributed COVID-19 relief grants to 1.4 million Egyptians. The Agricultural Bank of Egypt and the Egypt Post were entrusted with this mission. An entirely new system had to be established with only a single weekend to prepare.
Once the governor of the central bank assigned us, we were given 48 hours to establish the grant system. All our outlets across the country were ready. Many of us have barely slept for the past 3 days for this system. When we started distributing, some spent the night in the bank. We've shown that our infrastructure is strong.
About 2 million Egyptians have applied for this 3-month grant program. To take pressure off banks, the COVID-19 grant also issues a debit card for each of the approved citizens. With it, they can withdraw funds for the following months from an ATM. In just 1 week, unbanked Egyptians were able to take a step forward towards financial inclusion. The biggest halls were open to accommodate the scores who showed up. One by one, they anxiously wait to hear their name called to receive their $32 for the month. It may not sound like a lot, but to many here, it will make a difference.
The circumstances are tough. There's no work. Many of the companies in the neighborhood have shut. Many people are avoiding to pay for parking. They park in the streets. So comparing $32 to no income, it will definitely support me.
The government will be paying out $134 million over a 3-month period. It could consider extending the grant if COVID-19 impacts last longer. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Elsewhere, the Democratic Republic of Congo has cut its economic growth forecast for 2020 from 4.1% to 1.1%. Africa's top producer of copper relies on its mining for about 80% of its export earnings. However, restrictions on production and the movement of people due to COVID-19 has reduced demand. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa reports from Kinshasa.
The DRC economy has been hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic. Restrictions on production and the movement of people globally has resulted in a reduction in the demand for the country's minerals that account for 80% of export revenues. That has prompted the country's central bank to slash its economic growth forecast for 2020 from 4.1 to 1.1%. And it's leading to calls for Congolese authorities to diversify the economy.
Notre économie est basée toujours sur les matières premières.
Our country's economy relies heavily on the mining sector, but those minerals will one day get depleted. We refer to them as non-durable goods in economics. Our government should instead focus on the agricultural sector. We have millions of hectares of arable land which is lying idle.
Earlier this year, the government announced a plan to promote economic diversification and industrialization across the country, but the outbreak of epidemics and insecurity in eastern DRC delayed the implementation of that plan. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected traders like Andre Lobo, who sells products imported from neighboring countries.
Our business keeps fluctuating ever since the partial lockdown was announced to combat the coronavirus outbreak. We are barely managing to stay afloat. Some days are really bad.
The Congolese franc hasn't been spared either. Low commodity prices and insufficient inflows of US dollars have caused the country's currency to weaken.
The prices of basic foodstuffs such as vegetables and fish have risen sharply. We are finding it very difficult to feed our families these days.
The slowdown in economic activity across the world has hit low-income earners like these women hard, but they have to keep on working to fend for their families despite the risks of contracting the coronavirus. Chris Sochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Well, as COVID-19 moves from a health crisis to an economic one, micro, small and medium-sized enterprises have been thrown off their feet. CGTN's Deji Badmos explores how small business owners in Africa's biggest economy are coping and adapting to the impact of this pandemic.
He runs a small architectural firm in Lagos, but for close to 2 months now, Anthony Unauro has shut down his firm and sent his workers home because of the COVID-19 pandemic. He now works from home, but says most of his job actually involves being on site, and he's not been able to do it.
Yes, my architect can work from home, but those on site, about 70% of my staff are on site. So when they say work from home, there are only barely 2 or 3 of my staff that can work from home, who are the architects and the engineers that can do their work on the computers and report back to me online. The rest, there's nothing they can do. They are home and they're on salaries. I need to pay those salaries no matter what, because if I refuse to pay those salaries, they'll become redundant.
Like most sectors, real estate development is taking a direct hit in Nigeria due to the coronavirus pandemic. With the lockdown, virtually every building construction project in the country has been halted, putting serious pressure on real estate developers. And nowhere is as much affected in the country as Lagos, which was previously in the middle of a real estate boom.
Dollar rate has gone to between 410, 420. Everything has increased. Iron cost, which is the major ingredient in the construction, is so expensive now. Cement is going to go higher. So all these prices are just going to skyrocket. And once these things start going up, everything goes up. So in the real sense, I know it's going to be serious trouble for us in the building industry. And most of us have taken loans to build most of these estates you see around.
Experts say the construction industry will suffer job losses when the economy restarts. Anthony is still keeping his workers and paying their salaries, but he says he might not be able to hold out for much longer if the economy does not restart soon.
For the month of April, I'm sure some people can be able to manage. But when it goes beyond this April, then it becomes a problem. We might be in this for more than a month, and it might stretch to 2 months before most of the small businesses can be able to come back to their full capacity. It's been a very big setback to all of us, small business owners, because most of our contracts are private contracts.
At the moment, everything is at a pause in an industry that is one of the biggest employers of labor in recent years in Nigeria. The country's leadership is under enormous pressure to restart the economy. But when that happens, the entire real estate industry might be waking up to a different reality as a result of COVID-19. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
China's economy shrank 6.8% in the first quarter of 2020 year-on-year amid the COVID-19 outbreak, the first such contraction in decades. Data released by the Bureau of Statistics reveals the country's GDP in the first quarter stood at over $2.9 trillion. Industry and retail sales have been badly hit by the pandemic. China's retail sales of consumer goods dropped almost 20% in the first quarter. The decline comes as efforts to curb the spread of the coronavirus have kept most Chinese indoors and many shops and restaurants shut over the past 3 months. China's industrial output fell over 1% in March from a year earlier, moderating somewhat after dropping over 13% in the first 2 months of the year. Well, to support the coronavirus-ravaged economy, China has pumped in more liquidity and cut funding costs. Here's a look back at Beijing's stimulus policies and supportive measures.
China wants its economy to pick up, but without a flood-like stimulus. So the strategy is to introduce measures in batches. On February 11th, the People's Bank of China launched a special re-lending fund of $42 billion to support medical and commodity enterprises. On February 27th, the central bank increased re-lending and rediscount quotas by $70 billion. The purpose was to ensure smooth resumption of production, especially in the catering, transport, and agricultural sectors. The step-by-step moves are to achieve policy flexibility amid uncertainties caused by the pandemic and maintain liquidity in what the government calls a reasonable and abundant state. And as a result, new bank lending in China rose to over $400 billion in March. On top of monetary easing, there are tax relief and fiscal measures to protect jobs. For struggling businesses, there are policies such as temporary value-added tax breaks and cuts in pension and insurance contributions. Various ministries have introduced measures from simplifying procedures for registering businesses to reducing business-related charges. Small and medium-sized enterprises are getting help in applying for loans, and advancing digital transformation has become the priority. To tackle labor shortages, authorities have moved recruitment online and offered subsidies to companies that expand recruitment. At the local level, governments have issued over $150 billion in bonds so far this year to pay contractors for public services and infrastructure projects. And China wants people to start spending again. Several provinces and cities have introduced vouchers to boost consumption. In Hangzhou, e-vouchers that can be used at restaurants and shops are proving popular. Batches are often snapped up in 2 hours. The vouchers are only valid for a short time. Experts say this measure is more effective than distributing cash. Economic activity is gradually picking up, but China still has a long way to go. Timothy Ulrich, CGTN.
Your sports news is still ahead. Coming up, disabled athletes in South Africa feel the impact of the coronavirus pandemic.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find